is Mike Glover, and I'll serve as the moderator for this forum, hopefully spurring some people here to say some very interesting things. And the thinking behind this forum is just a bipartisan group to bring virtually all points of view to the issue of climate change. I think we can all agree is a major issue of our time, one that a lot of people think about, one a lot of people talk about, and where there are a widely divergent array of opinions on the issue. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I'd like to thank everybody on the panel for agreeing to participate, and hopefully to provide us with an interesting and informative day. And the participants include Jeff Link, is a Democratic political strategist. Chad Brown is a former co-chair of the Polk County Republican Party. Matt Russell is a fifth-generation farmer and co-owner of Coyote Run Farm and the State Food Policy Project. Reverend Susan Guy is Executive Director of Iowa Interfaith Power and Light. David Gerard-Hari is the Director of Drake University's Environmental Science and Policy Program and Professor of Environmental Science. David Cottrell is a Republican political strategist. And we thank all of you for being a part of this forum. So if we could start with some questions here, and then we'll try to take some questions from the audience. The first is, what is your stance on climate change, and how do you view its effect on Iowa? Can we start with Mr. Cottrell?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. First of all, appreciate the chance to get my Republican credentials back. Lately I've been veering left on issues like gay marriage and other things. I think that where we're at with climate change, I'm certainly not a science denier. I appreciate that there is warming taking place. I appreciate that there is evidence that it is at least in some part man-made. I don't know that there's ever going to be consensus on how much of it is man-made. I'm really here to represent one point of view, which is that we can't construct a policy around climate change that sacrifices jobs at the altar of almost unilateral punishment of the American economy vis-a-vis the rest of the world. So going back to the 90s when Kyoto was passed and the resolution was put before the United States Senate, 95 senators voted against the Kyoto Accords and no senators voted for the Kyoto Accords. It was because of jobs. The Wharton School did a study that suggests that the impact on our economy would be to lose 2.4 million net jobs. At this point in our economy, it's an impossibility to look at something like that and think we should move forward. And $300 billion in lost economic output isn't something that makes any sense. I think we need to find some consensus on things we can do with the rest of the world as a partner that will not only preserve our ability to maintain a strong economy, a growing economy, but that doesn't put us at a competitive disadvantage with countries like India and China who don't have the same requirements placed on them because they're so-called emerging or developing economies.
David? Same question to you. What's your stance on climate change, and how do you view its effect on Iowa? How will Iowans notice climate change?
Right, so I mean, quickly, I think I was really glad to hear the comments from David. I think it's clear that climate is changing, and I think it's clear that climate change is caused by people. I think there's a huge amount of evidence for that. So the question then becomes, the place where we should be talking about this politically is, given the reality of climate change, what is the right response? And I think that's a place where there's a rich political conversation that we can be having. As far as its impact on Iowa, it's hard to say a number of things at that level, but a number of things happen, or a number of things are expected to happen. And what happens is, as greenhouse gases trap heat, that makes the high latitudes warm faster than mid latitudes and low latitudes. And what that means is the temperature difference between mid latitudes and high latitudes. I don't know, this is going to be faster than it sounds like it's going to be. That difference weakens, right? And so what that means is that what's powering the jet stream starts to weaken. And so what people are starting to think now is that as that jet stream weakens a little bit and isn't sort of jammed west to east like it is now, it starts to meander and slow. And what happens, the advantage of a strong jet stream is that it moves weather patterns quickly, right? So, you know, you get rain, then you get sun, then you get rain, then you get sun. As the jet stream kind of gets stuck and meanders because there's nothing kind of pushing it anymore, or at least not as much, then that's when you get these patterns that we're seeing where you have long periods of wet, long periods of dry, hot years get hotter, dry years get drier, and wet years get wetter. And so you get constants. It's not necessarily always going to be hotter. It's not necessarily always going to be wetter or drier, but years are going to be more extreme for those reasons.
Let's hear from Reverend Guy about this, and if it seems occasionally during the course of this, I'm going to sound like I'm pushing this because I am. There's a lot of topics to cover.
Right. Well, certainly from the faith perspective, we believe that climate change is a moral issue. There are huge climate change impacts that are felt by the most vulnerable populations, not only locally within the state, as we witnessed with flooding, but also globally. And as people of faith, we feel called to speak on behalf of those most vulnerable populations, and certainly on behalf of our children and future generations. So we feel that the impacts also can be felt when we look at the programs that most churches are already participating in. We look at feeding ministry, hunger relief ministries, both locally and globally. We're looking at water impacts, clean water issues, and certainly global population migration and climate refugees. And so those are all issues that are exacerbated by the issue of climate change and can be felt here in Iowa.
Mr. Russell, same question to you. What's your stance on climate change, and how do you think it'll be felt here in Iowa?
So I farm, my husband and I farm in Marion County. I grew up in western Iowa. My parents are still farming 1,000 acres, 140 cow-calf operation. Pat and I do small scale. We have 110 acres. We do a grazing program for beef and for chickens and laying hens and produce. So as a farmer, I really depend on science, and I think most farmers do. And if they themselves aren't scientists, they're buying from people who are selling them science. So I believe the science, and the science is really clear that climate change is happening. I also believe from my own experience what's happening. I'm 43. I probably don't remember the first 4 years of my life, maybe say the first 6 years of my life. So it was at 37 years of experience that I can remember being involved in agriculture in Iowa. And in the last 5 years, we've seen historic floods, historic droughts, and then this year we saw historic everything. And for me, the surreal moment, and was this caused by climate change? I don't know, but this is what scientists told us climate change was going to look like, and I was living it. So I'm walking in May 3rd in 4 inches of snow out to look at some cattle by the pond, and I can hear the frogs chirping and snow, and I remember thinking, in Iowa, we don't have frogs and snow at the same time. And I literally thought, this is what climate change is going to look like. It makes it really hard for me to do my job as a farmer. So we're not going to destroy the planet, and we're probably not even going to destroy human life. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is destroying the climate. That's going to cause tremendous inequality. It's going to cause all kinds of problems, and we can do it easier or we can do it harder. And we will adjust. And if we put our heads in the sand and wait, we'll adjust. And there's going to be tremendous inequality. There will be people losing literally their lives, their cultures. The elite are going to survive. It's going to be very tumultuous. Or we can do it easy, and that is we can start doing something about it right now. And I think the easiest, the low-hanging fruit is politically, is to stop playing the political games and trust our scientists, trust American exceptionalism. We have led the world in the last century on a whole bunch of things, and China is going to fix this. India is going to fix it because they know that it's real and are already trying to figure out how to do it. So we can either stand back and let them, or we can be leaders. And as a farmer, and seeing how difficult it becomes to farm in historic floods, historic droughts, and then this year where we had snow in May, we had the coldest July, we were just finishing up probably the hottest September, we had the driest August, we had all the rain for the summer in May. That's what climate change looks like. That's what the scientists told us it was going to look like, and that's what it looks like. And I think we can do something about it. We can do it easy now, or we can do it harder, or let other people take care of it.
And Mr. Brown, Mr. Link, I'd like to get you to address this from your status as active politicians.
Sure. I think back to myself as a student at Drake, and my professor, Dr. Rogers, taught the science very well. And we would talk about what will it take to get the naysayers to agree that there's a problem. And we came to kind of a laughable conclusion that when it would snow in the summer, that everyone would agree, you know, and we were kind of laughing about this because this is the 90s and nothing like that had happened in Iowa. Well, sure enough, last June it snowed, and we still have naysayers, so I thought that would do it, but I'm not sure exactly what it will take to get people. I know that as co-chair of the Republican Party, when I resigned, I said that the Republican Party declared a war on science, and it seems that that was the things that I was facing, the constant arguments with people that would disregard the science.
Well, I sort of feel like I should be a climate denier here at the end of the panel for this. I think just, you know, from my perspective, as somebody who advises candidates and campaigns, you know, I think that if we really want to do something about this issue, we got to try and take the politics out of it. Because getting the politics involved, making this a very polarizing issue, I think just guarantees that nothing's going to happen. It's going to be complete inaction. So we got to find ways to address the problem, but not maybe necessarily talk about it in the frame that is so polarizing. And I think that's one of the things that would be really helpful from a sort of campaign and political practitioner view. And it's hard because you get sort of focused on a way of thinking and a way of talking about an issue. And then when you realize if you really want to make progress on that issue, you have to think about it and talk about it in a different way. So that's what I sort of start with.
I'd like to start with you again, Mr. Link. You've done a few things about politics, you know a little bit about politics. How has this issue been portrayed in the media and in politics? Has there been any rational sort of discussion, or is all finger pointing?
I mean, I think there's a lot of, you know, every journalism student learns that there's, you know, sort of two sides to a story. There's a protagonist and an antagonist. And I think the protagonist and the antagonist are talking past each other. And I don't think anyone's really paying attention to the other side. And that's really part of the problem. And, you know, I'm not sure how to get at that problem, but it just seems like, you know, we have stories, what was there, 2,000 scientists in the last couple of weeks that came out and said, yes, there is global warming, it's caused by people. That's ignored, not only ignored by the climate deniers, but they say, oh, well, this is exactly the reason why we got to stand up and come out against this. I mean, hardly seem like something you'd want to oppose, but it's gotten so polarized. And so we got to figure out how do we get beyond that? How do we get past all that rhetoric?
Mr. Brown, the same question to you, and eventually, isn't this problem going to have to be solved politically? I mean, there will have to be a political solution for anything to happen.
Sure. Well, according to the media, I know that the right-wing talk show hosts, WHO, Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck, they have literally said, and they've actually, this is as close to a quote as I can get, basically, to summarize it, it's a communist conspiracy. Basically, the communists have gone underground because the Soviet Union has fallen. So the communists have moved to the environmental movement, and that it's a conspiracy to destroy the United States, and that's and people listen to the radio talk show hosts and the people on Fox News and actually believe it. And so this is from the social conservatives that I've dealt with. These are the things that they come to me and say, and they definitely deny it. Now society is very different. Even my 5-year-old daughter, kindergarten, she knows that there is a problem, climate change. They talk about it, and I think that most people understand, though, that it is a problem. Unfortunately, the partisan politics have really caused a problem. It's very political. What'll have to happen will be for both parties to really realize that it is a problem, but unfortunately it hasn't happened yet.
Mr. Russell, the same question to you. How has this issue been handled or portrayed in the media? And as a retired journalist, feel free to beat up the media all you want.
Well, I think back to this two sides thing. I think that's been a real failure of journalism, and I think they do it because they think of this issue as political, and therefore they feel like they have to present both sides and give equal play. And when something is partisan and political, that's probably accurate. That's probably the right journalistic approach. But when you take something that's based on fact and science, and you have peer-reviewed this whole body of work that lays out a position, and not just in the United States, but globally, the scientists are so on board telling us what's happening and what the consequences are, that therefore is not the place for this balance of, well, 90-some% of all the scientists in the world who are studying this, they get equal time with the 5% who are studying this who disagree with them. That's the wrong approach. And as far as a political solution, it definitely is going to be policy and politics are going to play a huge part of the solution. But I would argue that the politics is preventing solutions from happening. And so we're defining the situation from a political standpoint for partisan reasons. But if you were to take that out and you were to get people on board, Americans can do incredible things. And I'm looking at some of the things farmers are doing. Grazing. The grazing, rotational grazing, which has a huge impact, potentially positive impact around the globe, to manage grasses correctly and use them to sequester carbon and to actually use those grasses to produce feed. That didn't come from the universities, it didn't come from the scientists, it didn't come from politics, it came from farmers actually innovating. And so the grazing programs up in Wisconsin, some of them got really a lot of pushback from the land-grant universities because it was contrary to kind of the agribusiness perspective. But now, after 20 years, you're seeing farmers being profitable, and agribusiness comes around and sells the seeds for the input and all this kind of stuff. We're seeing it now with cover crops, where farmers are innovating. And now, if you look up successful farming, they're doing stories on cover crops. Agribusiness is finding that they can sell this to seed. My point, sorry to be so long-winded, my point is that if we simply were to step back and stop playing politics with this issue and say, this is the situation, Americans can lead, and as politicians, we're going to create a situation that allows Americans to innovate and lead and discover, and I think that has a lot of potential. But we can't get there because we're stuck in this both sides, two sides, everybody's got to have this say, and it's really stagnating innovation and the ability of Americans to solve this problem.
Reverend God, is it the responsibility of the media to present the case for global warming before we can have a political solution?
Well, I certainly agree with what Matt was saying. Journalism tries to sort of present both sides of this issue as if the science is not settled when it is. And so I think what we're creating is an imbalance in the news media. And it is inhibiting our ability to come up with thoughtful solutions. because we keep focusing on the arguments instead of, where do we go from here and how do we move forward with American innovation to take care of this issue. And I would also argue that in terms of solutions, there are certainly legislative solutions that are out there and administrative solutions that are out there, but I would also argue that there are local solutions and there are local communities that are doing really good work to implement wonderful, innovative strategies to lower their greenhouse gas emissions in their communities, such as installing solar and wind capacity, working on energy efficiency and transportation issues. And I think that if we can't move forward legislatively, then we also need to look at all other alternatives, such as what we can do locally.
David, same question to you. Is it the responsibility of the media to present the facts of this so that a political discussion can begin?
Yeah, well, it's a tough question. I mean, I think the problem is that the media is presenting the wrong debate, right? I mean, there's absolutely debate about climate change, but it's not about whether climate change is happening or not, right? That's the debate that we hear about a lot, and it's an easy issue to confuse because climate change is fairly complicated, and I can point to a bunch of things that if you don't know a lot of other things about the climate, make it look like, maybe it's not caused by people or, it's happened in the past and it's just natural and those kind of things. So what the media, what I'd like to see is everybody acknowledging there's a really good debate about sort of what should we do, right? When we talk about roads, for example, nobody argues, roads aren't in bad shape, right? We all kind of start from the perspective that, here's the state of the roads, and now what do we do about it? Do we decide it's time to fix them, or do we let them stay how they are, and so on? It's the same with climate change, right? We need to sort of get over this imagining that there's a scientific discussion going on, and sort of say, okay, given climate change, let's present now the different options, right? And one of those options may be don't do anything about it, right? Maybe it costs too much. And that's a reasonable conversation to be having where the media can say, A versus B. But I want to briefly touch on the question that you asked earlier, which was, does there have to be a political solution? And the problem with that is that apparently there can't be a political solution to anything in the United States right now, right? So in some sense, if we're going to wait for a political solution, then we're stuck. And I agree with David that it's going to be really hard to get the United States and China on signing the same treaty. Although I think there are ways that one could do that. So I think what we really should be doing is, given our political situation, we really should be thinking as hard as we can about what can be done outside of the political sphere to address or mitigate emissions.
And with the government shutting down at midnight tonight, there's a strong case for your argument.
For example.
Mr. Scottsville, is it the responsibility of the media to lead a reasoned discussion on this issue, and have they failed?
Yeah, they failed. And it is their responsibility. The thing is, you know this, Mike, it's all about ratings now. It's all about how many times your articles get retweeted and picked up and discussed on, MSNBC or Fox, where, like Jeff said, we're talking past each other. It makes no sense to me that we continue to focus on, these 2 points of view that are completely irreconcilable. One is that the Earth is getting cooler, and one is that the Earth is getting warmer, and we do have facts that say it's getting warmer over time. So I think the media needs to quit covering that conversation completely. It's completely counterproductive. And what they need to be talking about is, what are the available solutions? Does it have to be about, how much emissions we're putting in the air? Are there other solutions? I mean, I've seen some science that says we could increase the levels of sulfur in the atmosphere to slow down the reflection of sunlight back into the upper atmosphere, which might have a positive impact. Who knows what kinds of solutions might be out there that aren't just about greenhouse gases and emissions of greenhouse gases, but I do think it's time to end the debate over, you can listen to Fox News all day long and be bombarded with one point of view, and you can listen to MSNBC all day long bombarded with the complete opposite point of view. You can listen to CNN and be thoroughly confused by everything that they say. I don't know that it's productive anymore to continue having that particular debate, because it doesn't ever get us to the next point, which is what do you do?
Okay, and Mr. Costa, I'd like you to start. The President's climate plan includes several points. It includes cutting carbon pollution in America, preparing for the impacts of changing climate, and leading international efforts to address global warming. Are you supportive of that plan? Pieces of it? Is it going in the right direction? Is it heading in the wrong direction?
I think it's going in the right direction to a certain extent. Number one, I do think we ought to help lead the international conversation. The problem is the history has been that we're supposed to lead the conversation and do the most while other countries get exemptions because they're emerging economies. If we're going to all go forward with ways to trim our emissions, we're going to have to do it. Everybody's going to have to do it together. We also have to recognize there's going to be a cost to it. Things are going to cost more. Are we prepared for that? People have to be prepared to go through some economic stress around changing the way we interact with energy in this country. I also don't, the biggest problem I have is that we've got to find a way to get both parties in a place where they can kind of agree on at least what the problem is. And right now we're not there. The government shutdown is a perfect example. For a lot of Republicans, it looks like Obama is coming at this from a place of wealth redistribution, and that's where you're going to see the resistance among Republicans. If they think he's trying to slow the economy down and redistribute wealth and it favors other countries, then they're not going to like it. So he's going to have to deal with that as kind of the first and biggest messaging problem that he's got, because otherwise you'll get a complete stonewall in Congress and from the loudest voices in the Republican Party.
Mr. Lincoln, let's go to you. Is this about climate change or is this about wealth redistribution?
No, I don't think it's about wealth redistribution. And I also don't think that Obama ever woke up one morning and said, how do I slow the economy down? I think, it started out slow when he first took office. But, he's been trying to add jobs. He's been trying to get the economy moving. It's been a top priority of the administration through the first term and now into the second term. But I think we do have to focus on where you can point the tools of government to create opportunities in the economy. So are there innovations that we could support that might actually create jobs here and that we could export to India and China to help them clean up their mess? I mean, those are the kind of approaches that I think might be thoughtful and might be a place where you could get more than 10 congressmen to agree. And those are the kinds of things that we have to try and find common ground on. If you say the word global warming, you're going to have half the Congress say no and half the Congress say yes. If you say, okay, how do we encourage innovation in energy that will create jobs in the United States that we might be able to export to help other countries reduce emissions or to have a cleaner economy, that might be a place where we can at least have a first conversation. And given the state of affairs these days, having one conversation is better than we're doing on things like the budget or the debt ceiling.
Mr. Brown, the same question to you. President Obama has put a plan on the table. Is that a good place to start? Is the fact that he's got a plan on the table at the beginning of the conversation? How do you assess it?
I think it's a good place to start. Cutting carbon pollution in America is a good thing for everyone. Let's just face it. Even if you don't agree 100% on global warming, you still have to admit that co-pollutants such as ozone in particular and some other ones that the long-term exposure to these pollutants has been linked to premature death. So I think that in terms of healthcare, it just makes sense that we should face these things. So more power to them. I think that I'm not sure, I don't see it getting past the House, but it's definitely a good place to start.
Mr. Russell, I go to a little bit of a different question to you. What are the biggest misconceptions or myths about climate change?
Well, I think one of the biggest is the notion that addressing climate change is only a cost. There are all kinds of things that come out of when we, a couple of things. One, when we change a paradigm, so when we went from whale oil to coal and then to, well, actually it's coal to whale oil to petroleum. Whenever you have a shift like that, it's tumultuous and things get shaken up, and there's winners and losers. And there are some costs, but there's also some real benefits. And I think we're at a time where we're really on the cusp of a paradigm shift. And so